those hours don't count. I'm like, okay, maybe in your mind or on paper, but I was there. And that was labor. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Uncovery Podcast. My name is Maddie and it's been a few weeks, even though I thought it was going to be just maybe a week. I have this little cherub with me again, and I don't want to blame the baby too much for, having not recorded in a while. I feel like that's low-hanging fruit to be like, well, I'm a new mom and I have a baby and so I, can't get anything done. I have two minds of this where I kind of came into motherhood thinking, shirk all of the generalizations about not having time, not being able to do things. Just get rid of all of those stories because otherwise you will have that experience basically. And having now been in it for almost 3 months, so he'll be 3 months in 1 week's time, there are limitations to the hours that you have, and it looks different across time. So if I could go back in time, and if there's any podcasters that are going to have a newborn, then take this as some kind of little tidbit of advice. But if I could go back to when he was first born, I would podcast all the time. I would podcast every day. I realize that the newborn phase has its own very real limitations, just like physically, mentally, emotionally, that impact your ability to do things in a different way. But they are very sleepy during that period of time. They are kind of just like little potatoes that eat. And so you actually have a lot more time to do stuff, but you just are less rested because they also do not sleep very well. So it's kind of like you trade one piece of hard work for another in motherhood. But all of that is to say, I had magical intentions about weekly podcasting, and I have magical intentions as a resolution for the rest of 2026 because I've designed kind of like an ideal week in the life. But as we know, we make plans and babies laugh. So here we are. But this is now incredibly overdue because what I want to talk about today is about my birth story basically, and everything that I was wrong about going into birth and then changed my mind about, or opened my eyes to, or got humbled by, or whatever. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But obviously he's almost 3 months old. So it's a good thing I wrote it down ages ago, because otherwise I probably would have no real memory of what happened. Although it is the most significant 36 hours of my entire existence. It's a little fuzzy because it feels like you're on drugs, even if you're not on them. So yeah, we're going to talk about my birth story, things that I changed my mind about, and then sort of these learnings about how this kind of correlates to eating disorder recovery or recovery in general, because it's just something that I've been thinking about, that there are these commonalities when you go through a thing, and it doesn't matter what that thing is. There are some themes. So anyways, that's what we're going to talk about today. I think the best way to structure this is to do an as brief as possible rendition of my birth story and everything that kind of happened on that day/days. Yeah, and basically how it went. So I was a bit early when I went into labor. I think I was about 5 or 6 days early before his due date, but I essentially went into early labor early in the morning. So I kind of woke up at about 5 a.m. and I felt this kind of cramping, and I had no Braxton Hicks. I had no sort of signs of, labors coming soon in my late pregnancy. So I had a couple crampy feelings, and it sort of woke me up every half hour for a couple of hours. Then I decided to just, get up at about 7, and I had a bit of show when I went to the bathroom, and I was like, oh, something's happening. And it's normal to have spotting and bleeding and things, kind of throughout your pregnancy. Obviously not a lot of it, but it's normal to have a bit. I had never had any. So this was actually a change for me in a way that I was like, something is happening, I think. So I went downstairs and I said to my fiance, I think I might be in labor. And he was sitting at the, dining room table, he was working away, and he's like, oh, wow, okay. But at that point, there's not really anything you do as move into early labor. You don't do anything. There's no action. There's no, oh, we go to the hospital, we do this, we prepare this. It's kind of like you just sort of ride through it as much as you can until you can't anymore. That's sort of the trajectory, is you tolerate it until it's intolerable. And then you do something about it. You go somewhere. So I had all of these ideas about all the things that I would do throughout my labor, and the stretching I would do, and the bouncing on the ball that I would do, and the baths and the walking and the exercises and all of the different positions and, things for Adrian to do as I moved through labor throughout the day and things like that. I had this very optimistic view of how it would actually feel throughout the labor itself. And my reality was that I had contractions every 5 minutes from the exact beginning. So there was no we're ramping up. It's every 30 minutes, then it's every 20, then it's every 10. It was immediately every 5 minutes. And it was that until it got even shorter, very, very close to when Baba was born. So the day unfolded with just a lot of discomfort. I had 2 different appointments. I had a GP appointment just to sign up for a new GP, just happened to have that scheduled that day. I had my 39-week appointment with my midwife, just happened to be that afternoon. And so that was great, because then I sort of just got to ask them or bounce off them, is this going well? Am I doing what I need to be doing? And they're basically unless you can't stand it, it's early still. So keep on keeping on, go home, hang out, eat, and relax, basically. And by that point, I was already in quite a significant amount of pain. And you're never sure how much pain you're supposed to be feeling, or I definitely didn't know, because labor is supposed to be painful. But in the early stages, I kind of had this idea that maybe it wouldn't be that painful, but it felt very intense to me very early. And I was like, am I just weak? What's happening? But anyway, it was uncomfortable, to say the least, especially by sort of the mid-afternoon. And I was, eating, and I was okay. And I attempted to kind of just lay on the couch and watch a movie, and I would have to keep pausing it because I was just in pain and not able to pay attention. So in the evening is when it ramped up quite significantly. And we had a plan with a doula to come over to the house when it felt right. And then the midwifery care in Alberta is amazing. And so they were actually to come to the house at some point to, give you a check and tell you when you actually need to go to the hospital, etc. So we had all these, people and resources that we were going to be drawing upon and having as part of this process, which gave me a lot of comfort. I didn't feel like we were flying blind. And also my fiance was amazing, 20 out of 10. He's an absolute rock and just so calm, no matter what is happening or things that he's probably observing or feeling inside. He's just there 100% the whole time. So I was very, very well looked after throughout this entire process. The evening is when things started to sort of ramp up. And I would say this kind of feeling mentally you're in a different stratosphere, a different realm. I don't know if it's the divine feminine, just coming in. You feel like you're kind of on a mushroom trip if you've ever done one. It's like you're in another state of being altogether, because you're just sort of focused so much on breathing through, getting through, and moving through the contractions and these waves that are coming, that you feel coming. So that's when it got quite intense. And I'll pause here just to not be trigger warning-y, because I just genuinely don't think that those are helpful. But there are outcomes of eating disorders like bulimia where you're throwing up on purpose. And then there is real life where things happen to you and you are throwing up not on purpose. I'm going to discuss a little bit about that just briefly right now. So if you're not comfortable hearing about throwing up, then please skip this part. I stopped being able to keep food down, basically starting in the evening of that first day, and stopped being able to keep water down very shortly thereafter. So trying to fuel and hydrate is actually a really, really important part of labor and birth, because your uterus is a muscle, your body is full of muscles, and those muscles all need to be fueled in order for them to work. And after hours and hours and hours and hours of them working, you can really fatigue if you are not fueling properly. So it's very good advice, hello, unless you are having a planned C-section or a surgery, that you need to be eating and drinking. But that was off the table because I could not keep anything down starting the evening. That's a little bit of like foreshadowing as for what is to come in terms of my experience. So that was quite miserable. I will not lie about that. I was in quite a lot of pain by that point. And so we were kind of playing with like, when do we call the doula? It wasn't until probably like 11 p.m. that we called our doula and had her come over. And then she did her doula thing. But I had been laying basically on the couch doing labor for hours at that point. And that is like against what you are basically supposed to be doing, which is moving around and keeping in motion, because that helps everything progress and dilate and the baby comes down more. And if you're moving, it's helping everything. You're stretching. And I was like, it was not happening for me because I was just like, I'm in too much pain. Like, how the heck am I supposed to be walking? Now, what the magic of the doula was is that she was like, I understand that. However, in order for us to get this going, and then the pain will eventually end because you will give birth, is we need to get to a later stage of labor, meaning you need to be moving around. We got to get you moving. So she just had me walking around our kitchen island very slowly. And then I would like keel over every whatever number of minutes, 3 to 4, probably by this point. She had me walking up and down the stairs, which was genuinely like being tortured. I was like, this is like cruel and unusual punishment. And I genuinely don't know what I thought the pain was going to be like, but it was not as bad as this is what I thought. So those were sort of two things that we did to kind of like get labor moving. And it's just like little baby steps at a time. Adrian would kind of like walk with me or hold me, and then we would kind of then they would just kind of like sit and I'd walk around and they'd drink water and we would just like hang out. But I was just like in agony the whole time we were hanging out. Luckily, I had like huge amounts of like trust and familiarity with both my doula and my midwives. So like when people are coming over to your house and you're in the middle of labor, it's this like very strange thing where they're encountering you in a totally different state than they've ever met you before. So this kind of like, hello, how are you? Like, come on into my home. Is this like, that's out of the picture completely. I found bathing in a warm bath actually did help in sort of the middle of my labor for some of that pain relief. And my plan was actually to have a water birth in the hospital when we got there, because there's one room in the hospital that we were sort of designated to that has a birthing tub. And that was my intention, my plan. Speaking of intentions and plans, my entire plan was to do all of this unmedicated myself, completely naturally, no interventions, yada, yada. The reason for that is that this cascade effect in the medical system, when you have sort of a medicalized birth, let's call it, it often ends in a C-section, higher risk, and some not ideal outcomes if you can help it. C-sections are there for a reason. Emergency C-sections are there absolutely for a reason. We need to be able to have these services and the type of medical care that we can address all kinds of different circumstances. That is obvious, but it's not unavoidable. You do not have to have a C-section, and our rates of C-sections are like, they've got to be like, what is it, 40% or something like that, I'm pretty sure. And the like recommendation by the WHO is that they're like less than 10 or something like that. I will fact check the numbers, but our C-section rates are astronomically high, and it's just not necessary. And I think that people and medical professionals can basically default to that if things aren't progressing fast enough, or if someone's been induced and then they have to like go through this like cascading effect to like basically inject you with more things to get your body moving in a way that it wasn't doing on its own. And then you usually end up having a C-section because the baby gets uncomfortable or the heart rate drops. There's too much monitoring. The sooner you're in the hospital, the more stuff they're kind of fiddling around with. And then it's just more likely that you're going to end up either with a stressed baby and a stressful birth or a C-section. And so my whole thing was like, I want to do this as naturally as possible. I was doing all of the prep beforehand. I was doing the dates and the tea and the walking and the stretching, and I was running like until the day before I went into labor. So I was trying to set myself up in the best possible way, even doing things like hypnobirthing, doing all of the like perineal massage, just to make sure that like I had the most ideal birth possible. So these were all of like my grand plans. Fast forward again, I'm in major agony. I'm going from the bath to the bed and basically just like laying there kind of like groaning, and I'm on a different planet. I'm not making eye contact with my fiance. I'm not making eye contact with anybody. I am just like inside my body, just like moving through this over and over. And we're timing the contractions. They're kind of staying the same. And at a certain point, this is about, I want to say it's maybe like 2 or 3 in the morning. I'm like, I think we need to call the midwife. Like I want to be checked. This is very, very untenable for me. This is extremely difficult. I cannot ignore them anymore. They say like, ignore. I'm like, we haven't been able to ignore them for, 12 hours. So we call the midwife and she comes over and checks me and I'm 4 centimeters dilated. And I was like, surely not. Like, surely I'm like 9. I'm like, surely I'm like almost there because it's been almost 24 hours and this is insane. So at that stage, I basically was like, I need something stronger than my own will. I still could not keep anything down. I was basically dry heaving at that point because there's nothing left in my body. And so I'm fatigued. And so back to this kind of like uterus as a muscle thing, I'm toast. Like my body is toast. There is like no fuel. There is like, I'm going to like lose strength basically if I have to keep kind of laboring at this rate for ages. So the midwife basically recommends like you can go to the hospital and you can get something called therapeutic rest. Now it is neither therapeutic nor is it restful. However, it's called therapeutic rest. It's basically like Gravol and morphine. It's a painkiller and Gravol. So what it does is it makes you super sedated and tries to take the edge off of some of the pain. And, it can basically help you get through a period of your labor. So while your labor kind of continues to progress, but you get some rest. Because at this point, I've been up for 24 hours as well. So we end up getting me to the hospital. Now, the trip from the house to the hospital, probably the worst part of the entire labor journey, because you can't lay down and like curl up and like get through the kind of wave of contractions. You have to be like sitting in your car. And it was just, I have like kind of like little flashes of like driving at night in the middle of the night. I think it was like 3:00 in the morning or something like that. Just flashes of these streets as I'm going, just moaning the whole time. And I will say that your self-consciousness completely goes out the window when you are kind of like pregnant. That has an element of that, but definitely labor and birth. You're making sounds you never thought that you would make. You do not care that your loved one is there. You're not trying to be cute. You're just literally like a passenger within your own body moving through these motions. So anyway, I'm moaning away in the passenger seat. We get to the hospital. I'm like not sure how I'm going to be able to walk because it's basically you walk between contractions. And then when they come, you're folded in half. Like you are bent over. It is insane. So at the hospital, they have us in basically this holding room and they give me this therapeutic rest. So that was kind of like the first thing that I sort of deviated from, let's call it the birth plan, the like illuminated, like shiny birth plan that I had 6 printed copies of and everybody had one and everybody knew all the things that I was definitely going to do and definitely not going to do. So this was kind of like the first deviation. I was like, I'm toast. I like need something. Now, as I said, therapeutic rest is neither therapeutic nor restful. You're still like writhing on this bed every 4 minutes, but you're just like less aware of it in between contractions. So it almost feels like you're sleeping in between contractions, but it's every like 3 minutes. So then you're up awake in agony again. And bless him, Adrian was like an absolute just angel trooper because he was really advocating for me to be able to get a room in the hospital and actually get admitted. But we were in sort of this like holding area for hours and hours and hours. The birthing room with the pool was taken by someone. Obviously they're first come, first serve. You can't schedule those. So that was off. That was out of the question. So that was no longer an option. And, that was kind of, number 2, we knew that was a possibility, but that was the other thing along this kind of journey that wasn't going to the birth plan. So we were just trying to get normally admitted. And in the meantime, exploring further painkiller options because I was still having a rough go. And I still had a lot of, labor left and needed to be able to get through that without completely fatiguing. And I was basically like, at that point, I was like, I'll take anything. I'm like, I do not care. But preparing for birth and having a birth plan means that you like have these sort of intentions that then you can remind yourself of, or at least validate with the, medical professionals that are caring for you. And so I asked about the epidural, and the epidural actually doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier to the baby in the same way that, like fentanyl would, which is literally something that they like can offer you. So these different options were being explored, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to do the epidural. I'm going to do it. My fears around the epidural were that it can slow down labor and then require further sort of induction methods to move things along, because basically it's kind of cut off some of the sort of, connections to your body. I really had fear of not being able to feel my body, not being able to feel my labor, not being able to know like when contractions were coming or how to push and things like that. can definitely tear more if you have an epidural. Not being able to walk or control my legs was a huge fear of mine. So I was like, in my mind going in, I was like, the worst thing that could happen is if I get an epidural, which is dramatic, but like it definitely isn't. So there's something that I've definitely changed my mind about. Anyway, we get admitted and we get the epidural. And when I tell you that whoever that anesthesiologist was did the best possible job that they could possibly done, because it's difficult to perfectly titrate the amount of medicine to go into you in order to get this kind of like ideal scenario for your epidural, because it's based on sort of like your weight, which I didn't know because I didn't get weighed throughout my pregnancy. But each person's kind of, metabolism of drugs that go into their system is going to be slightly different. So some people do get super, super numb, cannot walk, cannot do birthing positions like on the bed, which I really wanted to do because giving birth on your back is just like the worst. It's like a brutal, brutal idea. And that's just facts. So me being able to move around and do different birthing positions was actually really important to me. So all this to say, the epidural that they gave me was epic because I could still walk. I could still move all around. The only thing it did was just like take the raw edge off of the pain in those contractions. So I was alert again. I was alive again. I could drink juice and keep it down. Like I was like reborn basically out of this sort of period of just complete internalness on another dimension. I like reemerged and was like smiling and joking and happy. So that's what the epidural did for me. This is not, obviously, none of this is medical advice, but it's something that I changed my mind about, is that I was like, that was the right decision for me in that moment based on my circumstances and context. And I think I would have had a very, very stressful, difficult time trying to grit my teeth through the remainder of labor with a hope and a prayer and hypnobirthing. It just wasn't doing enough for me on that day, in that body, in that labor. So then it just became a kind of waiting game for me to be fully dilated and ready to push. And that came along with relative ease. Like there was some talk of, oh, these contractions are getting a little bit, slow, further apart. So, they talked a little bit about Pitocin. I really didn't want to put any kind of like synthetic hormones in my body if I could help it. So I was like, can we just like wait and see if it kind of comes back online? And that's exactly what happened, is that my body was just like, okay, we'll just like ramp up then since you asked so nicely. So yeah, I had maybe 40 minutes of pushing in the end. It was the most insane experience. Again, when you have a birth happening, the self-consciousness just goes out the window. You're like, my body is my body. I'm, bent over on all fours on the back of this bed, pushing this baby, and the nurses are changing over. So they're like, hi, I'm so-and-so, like, nice to meet you. And you're like, hello, nice to meet you. Come on in. Let's like in full glory display. So it's like, you have no time to like be self-conscious. You have no time to think about those things. And I think it's a really nice sort of parallel to how we should really live the rest of our lives. Like, may we all be as low on the self-conscious scale as a woman in labor, because she's just getting through it. She's just going through it. She doesn't care. That, I think, is a lesson that we could take away from all birth stories. So I'm pushing, and my fiance is going back and forth sort of from me holding on to his hand and arm. I do not know how he held his arm so strongly. Well, I mean, I do. I've seen his biceps, but I was wrenching on this. Like, I was hanging on to this arm through these pushing exercises. And then he would kind of like pop down because he was going to be delivering the baby. So catching the baby. So yeah, that went on back and forth. And it's like, it's indescribable. It's sort of just like you feel very, very held by everybody that's around you. In an ideal situation, I'm sure this isn't everyone's experience, but it certainly was mine, between the midwives, the nurses, my doula, and my fiance, most importantly. Like, everyone is cheering for you. Everyone is like, yes, great, good. Like this feeling of being like over the top held, which is almost, if I'd had kind of the wherewithal within those moments, I think I would have felt overwhelmed by the love and support that was kind of in that room, because it's just like nothing else that I've ever experienced. Just like the attentiveness and the attention, and the nurses and the team at the hospital were just like 20 out of 10, phenomenal. And my midwife, absolute angel, doula, amazing, and fiance, #1 person like in the whole world. So that made it as good of an experience as it could possibly be, despite sort of like its painful first parts. But in the end, yeah, this little baby had no issues, no stress, no increased heart rate throughout the entire process. Like, it was just perfect. And it's the most insane thing to hold a baby that you created, because you haven't actually seen the baby get delivered. So it's this like very strange kind of thing where you're trying to connect the baby that was just inside you to the baby that you're now like looking at on your chest. And totally surreal, especially after being, by that point, basically awake for 36, 37 hours as well. So your brain is not even really capable, I don't think, of taking that on. So that is my birth story. And that was not as short as I wanted it to be. But yeah, it's like kind of expectations versus reality across the board. You think that something's going to go one way, and it just isn't. And I like being wrong. I like changing my mind. And even though I know that what I intended for was as ideal as possible and actually what I would want to choose and intend to choose going forward, giving grace and being a bit flexible in my mindset ended up being what I needed to be to sort of pivot in those moments, because it was crazy. It is actually insane that women just like do this every single day. It's nuts. I'll say a little bit about how, body image, or thinking about bodies, or eating disorder recovery and body image, and how that sort of shifts and has shifted, and how that's kind of exemplified during labor and birth. But it's connected to like the real lack of self-consciousness, but also just like the absolute power and magnificence that a woman's body is and what it can do throughout pregnancy, labor, and birth. It's just, it makes it impossible to hate your body when it's done something like this. And what it is capable of doing and then continues to do in motherhood, especially if you're breastfeeding, is just like an insane thing to think about. Like, there's no way that you really understand it until you've been through it. But make no mistake, like, women are very, very powerful creatures. And by fueling and taking care of our bodies, we allow them to do things that are amazing. And they can't do amazing things unless we take care of them, unless you recover from your eating disorder. Literally none of this is possible. So continuing to be grateful for recovery in this season is definitely something that I'm thinking a lot about. Yeah, and just the overall kind of shift in identity between, eating disorder, recovered from eating disorder, and then just like human being and woman in the world is, something that has definitely been a theme in my life ever since. I'll say maybe a couple things more about, expectations versus reality, is that all of the preparation and all of like the good things that I was doing for myself, for my birth, in preparation for labor, hoping that it would be, like nice and short. It wasn't. It was ages. Although, here's a cruel and unusual thing that they do. They don't count, early labor as hours of labor. So at the end of the day, even though I was actually, in my mind, in labor for 36 hours, they like only count the last 9 or 10 or something like that, because that's active labor and the other stuff just like is early labor. I was like, let me tell you, that did not feel like some kind of pre-labor body preparing to give birth. That was a full-on event. So I think that we should redefine how we measure labor for women, because this whole pre-labor thing, those hours don't count. I'm like, okay, maybe in your mind or on paper, but I was there. And that was labor. I think sort of another lesson in this sort of eating disorder / labor and birth parallel is this kind of like humility, and that control is really an illusion. So wanting to micromanage, wanting to set yourself up for like the most ideal XYZ, whether that's I want my body to be like this, I want my life to be like this, I want my labor, I want my birth to be like this. It helps us psychologically to feel like we have control, because uncertainty is really uncomfortable. But you just don't have control. You don't over really anything that happens, in your life. And you can do the co-creation with the universe to have the best outcomes that you possibly can. But there's an element of, it just is what it is, and it's going to transpire the way it's going to transpire. And recovery feels like that because you're like, well, I just want to gain this much weight or just change these behaviors just a little bit and then hold on to this piece that still gives me this feeling of control over my body. But control over your body, control over recovery is actually a farce. So your recovery is going to look the way that it looks. You can do your part. You can speed it along if you commit and you just decide and you just freaking do it. But it is not going to be what you expect it to be. There's going to be moments of like, oh, I don't like this, or this is uncertain, or it's very like sticky. But you need to be able to kind of just like lean into that and then adapt and pivot. Take things as it comes. Have the information ahead of time that you need in order to be able to make those pivots with confidence and grace. So this applies to birth, this applies to eating disorder recovery. Planning with a birth plan, having those questions answered about what do I want, what do I intend, but then have this kind of like decision cascade of if this, then this. If this happens, then maybe we'll pivot to this way. But if you're informed about what those things are, what they mean, and what the impact of them will be on your experience, then you're equipped with that knowledge to be able to pivot in that moment. And when you're in labor, you need to have that knowledge already solidified before, and or have a partner and support team that is like completely comfortable with that information and very well versed, which I did. Because when you're in labor, you don't want to be answering questions. You don't want to be taking on new information. It's not going in. So having some preparation around that to know what the journey is going to be and what your options are, that's so important, and equally important in eating disorder recovery. So you know kind of what the landscape is going to be, what the journey is going to be. And even though each birth and labor is different and each eating disorder recovery is different, you know that there are going to be some common themes. You know that there are going to be some things that you are going to be able to come to expect happening. And therefore, you can have the information that will help you make decisions along the way. And you have a support team that will help you along the way. So those things are very parallel. It's basically like an extra lesson in accepting less than perfection, which as a recovering person who likes control and things to be just so, this was just another kind of example and a really, really big life example of, yeah, things are going to be different than you want them to be sometimes, and that's okay. And the most important thing is healthy, happy baby, healthy, happy mommy, or if you're in recovery, healthy, happy life going forward. The rest of it is much, much less important. How everything looks is very not important. The last thing I think I would say is this feeling of failure versus success. So in recovery, you're often like feeling like you're failing all the time because your attachment is to this ideal body or shape or size or structure of eating, or even just like this like tether to these like very addictive behaviors, and that moving away from them feels like failure because you've worked so hard on your eating disorder. So it feels like failure to let go of it. And for me, having like a really idealized birth plan journey planned out and then, giving in and getting pain relief was something that I think I could have decided to wallow about or be like, oh, I feel like a failure because of this. And the reality is that it isn't a failure, that it's okay. And, people will judge, or people who care about how other people do their births would care about that. And I'll, put my hand up and say that I definitely had judgments about different birth interventions before I had labor and a birth of my own. So I get that this kind of like idealized version of what we see causes us to kind of like sit in judgment, but until you've been through it, man, like that is crazy. Whether you get an epidural, whether you do it au natural, it doesn't matter. Like you're gonna be going through it at some point. It's just a matter for how long, really. But yeah, that's my birth story / things I was wrong about in labor, and then I can talk in another episode about all the things that I would been wrong about being a mother in the newborn phase. So overall, the small little life update before I close out is that we are doing very, very well. And the first couple months were like a total blur. The first couple weeks are like an insane blur where it's like I actually don't remember much of what happened. But it's kind of like you just put one little foot in front of the other and you pivot and you accept less than perfection, but you nail your basics and you just try to be present in every single moment because it goes by so fast. Like I'm like the last podcast I recorded, he was so small. He was in a different carrier. He's in a different carrier now because that one, he still fits in it, but it's still, this one's like, better for a baby that's growing. So are we growing. So we're all very happy. We're all very healthy. And we are taking it as it comes. So I will see you on the next episode. Thanks for being here.